The biting Memphis wind, a razor blade against Desa's cheek, seemed to slice through the thin fabric of his jacket. Jefferson Avenue stretched before him, a gray ribbon of asphalt under a bruised sky. Each exhale puffed out a small, fleeting cloud of white, a testament to the December chill. He shoved his hands deeper into his pockets, the meager warmth of the worn fabric offering little comfort. 12 years old, and already he knew the gnawing ache of winter in his bones. Just a few more blocks, he told himself, then Mama's hot chocolate and the blessed warmth of the radiator. The thought fueled his steps, a small ember of anticipation against the pervasive cold. He noticed the man then, huddled in the doorway of a closed furniture store. A mound of rags and cardboard, barely distinguishable from the discarded refuse that littered the sidewalk. Only the faint tremor that ran through the pile, a rhythmic shudder against the wind, betrayed the presence of life. Desa slowed, his gaze drawn to the barely visible hand, gnarled and dark against the gray, reaching out as if to grasp the fleeting warmth of the weak winter sun. A pang of something unfamiliar, a tightness in his chest, made him pause. He recognized it dimly from Sunday sermons at the Greater New Hope Baptist Church. Compassion. "Keep walking, Desa." His mother's voice, a constant echo in his mind, warned him against lingering. "Don't get involved. Mind your business." He knew the unspoken dangers of Jefferson Avenue, the whispers of trouble that lurked in the shadows. But the tremor of the man's body, the silent plea in that outstretched hand, resonated within him, a discordant note against the rhythm of his hurried footsteps. He thought of the hot chocolate waiting for him, the comforting warmth of his small apartment. He imagined that same chilling wind tearing at the fragile shelter of rags and cardboard, the relentless bite of the cold seeping into already weary bones. He hesitated, a war waging within him. The practical, cautious voice of his mother battled with a nascent empathy that blossomed in his young heart. His hand, instinctively, went to his jacket zipper. It was his only jacket, a hand-me-down from who knew who, threadbare and faded, but a shield against the unforgiving elements nonetheless. Giving it away meant facing the remaining blocks exposed to the biting wind. It meant shivering through the evening, perhaps even catching a cold. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, a physical manifestation of his internal conflict. But the image of that trembling hand, the almost imperceptible plea in the man's posture, wouldn't leave his mind. He felt a strange pull, an invisible thread connecting him to this stranger, a shared vulnerability in the face of the harsh reality of their lives. "He needs it more than me." The thought, once formed, solidified into a conviction. With a sudden resolve that surprised even himself, Desa unzipped his jacket. The cold air stung his skin, a sharp reminder of his sacrifice, but it was a small price to pay. He approached the man cautiously, the worn sneakers silent against the cracked pavement. He stood before the huddled form, the ragged breathing growing louder as he drew closer. "Here," he said, his voice barely a whisper against the wind. He extended the jacket, holding it out like an offering. The man stirred, slowly, as if roused from a deep sleep. He lifted his head, revealing a face etched with lines of hardship and weariness. His eyes, dull and clouded, blinked against the weak sunlight. He looked at Desa, then at the offered jacket, his gaze filled with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "You need it more than me," Desa repeated, his voice gaining strength. He placed the jacket gently beside the man, the warmth of the fabric still faintly radiating his body heat, a tangible offering of compassion. The man reached out, his hand trembling, and touched the worn fabric. A low whisper, barely audible above the wind, escaped his lips. "Thank you." The words, though faint, carried a weight of gratitude that resonated deep within Desa's soul. He felt a warmth spread through him, a warmth that had nothing to do with his jacket and everything to do with the strange, unfamiliar feeling that had compelled him to act. He nodded, a shy smile touching his lips. Turning, he continued his walk home, the biting wind now a secondary sensation, overshadowed by a profound sense of peace. He was cold, yes, but he was also inexplicably lighter, as if he'd shed not only his jacket, but also a burden he hadn't realized he was carrying. He didn't see the sleek black car parked across the street, its tinted windows obscuring the occupant within. He didn't see the keen eyes observing his every move, the thoughtful expression on the face of the man behind the wheel. He didn't hear the quiet murmur, "Remarkable," nor the subsequent phone call, a series of hushed instructions that would set in motion a chain of events that would irrevocably alter the course of his life. He just walked, his thin frame braced against the wind, his mind already anticipating the warmth of his mother's embrace and the sweet, comforting taste of hot chocolate. He was just Desa, a 12-year-old boy walking home from school on a cold December morning, unknowingly on the cusp of a destiny far greater than he could ever have imagined. The biting Memphis wind, a cruel hand on his back, pushed Desa through the cracked doorway of their apartment building. He hurried up the creaking stairs, the scent of stale cigarette smoke and fried onions clinging to the damp concrete walls, a familiar, if not entirely pleasant, welcome. He rubbed his arms, a futile attempt to generate some warmth against the chill that had settled deep in his bones. His breath plumed out in frosty puffs, each exhalation a stark reminder of the missing warmth of his jacket. He pushed open the door to their apartment, the familiar squeak of the hinges announcing his arrival. The apartment was small, just a cramped kitchen and a living area that doubled as his and his mother's bedroom at night. The air hung thick with the aroma of brewing coffee, a comforting scent that did little to dispel the lingering chill. His mother, Tanya, was at the stove, her back to him, humming a low, melancholic tune that always seemed to accompany the simmering pot. He watched her for a moment, the tension coiling in his stomach tightening with each second. He knew the question was coming. He could almost feel it hanging in the air, a silent accusation waiting to be voiced. "Desa." Tanya turned, a spatula clutched in her hand. Her smile, a beacon that usually lit up the small apartment, faltered. Her eyes, usually bright and full of life, narrowed slightly as they scanned him from head to toe, finally settling on the empty space where his jacket should have been. "Where's your jacket?" The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Desa swallowed hard, the lie forming on his lips before he pushed it away. Lying to his mother, even a small, seemingly harmless lie, always felt like swallowing shards of glass. "I gave it to someone," he mumbled, his gaze dropping to the worn linoleum floor. He traced patterns with the toe of his shoe, unable to meet her eyes. He imagined her disappointment, the flicker of worry in her eyes, and the knot in his stomach twisted tighter. "Gave it away." The spatula clattered against the stovetop. The sound, sharp and sudden, made him flinch. He braced himself for the inevitable reprimand, the familiar lecture about responsibility and taking care of what little they had. He knew she would be worried, furious even, but he also knew, deep down, that she would understand. He just hoped he could explain it in a way that made sense, a way that wouldn't make her worry more. He looked up, meeting her gaze. "He needed it more than me, Mama." He was really cold. The image of the shivering man, huddled in the alleyway, flashed in his mind. The man's hollow eyes, the blue tinge to his lips, the way his hands trembled uncontrollably. Desa shivered, not from the cold this time, but from the memory of the man's desperate vulnerability. Tanya's expression softened, the initial flicker of anger replaced by a wave of something else, something akin to understanding. She sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of all their struggles. She crossed the small space between them and pulled him into a hug, her arms tight around him. He buried his face in her worn sweater, the familiar scent of laundry detergent and her own unique fragrance filling his senses. For a moment, he just stood there, absorbing her warmth, the tension slowly ebbing away. "You got the biggest heart, I swear," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. He felt her hand stroke his hair, a gentle, reassuring touch. He knew she wasn't entirely happy about him giving away his only jacket, especially with winter setting in. He also knew that she wouldn't have wanted him to do anything differently. That's just the kind of woman she was. He pulled back slightly, looking up at her. He was really cold, Mama. Like really, really cold. He repeated the words, hoping to convey the urgency of the situation, the desperation he had seen in the man's eyes. He needed her to understand, not just the act itself, but the feeling behind it, the instinct that had compelled him to help. Tanya's eyes, now filled with a mixture of pride and worry, searched his face. I know, baby. I know. She ran a hand over his cold cheek, her touch sending a wave of warmth through him. Come on, let's get you warmed up. She led him to the small table by the window, pulling out a chair for him. I'll make you some hot chocolate. He sat down, watching her move around the cramped kitchen, her movements efficient and practiced. The rhythmic clinking of mugs and spoons, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the soft murmur of the radio playing in the background, these were the sounds of home, of safety and comfort. He felt a pang of guilt, a sharp stab of awareness of the sacrifices she made for him, the constant struggle to provide, to make ends meet. Giving away his jacket, while a small act of kindness, was also a practical loss, a burden she could ill afford. He knew they would have to figure out how to replace it, another worry added to the pile. He watched her, a silent question hanging between them. He wanted to ask about the money, about how they would manage, but the words caught in his throat. He didn't want to burden her further, not when she was already carrying so much. Tanya turned to him, a mug of steaming hot chocolate in her hand. She placed it in front of him, her smile a fragile thing, a brave attempt to mask the worry lines etched around her eyes. Drink up, she said softly, her voice filled with a tenderness that made his chest ache. He took a sip, the warm liquid spreading through him, chasing away the lingering chill. He closed his eyes for a moment, savoring the warmth, the sweetness, the simple comfort of the moment. He knew they would face challenges, that life would continue to throw curveballs their way. But in this moment, surrounded by the familiar scents and sounds of home, wrapped in the warmth of his mother's love, he felt a sense of peace, a quiet strength that allowed him to face the uncertain future. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that they would face it together. The biting Memphis wind seemed to mock Desa's threadbare sweater, a constant, nagging reminder of the warmth he'd sacrificed the previous night. He shuffled his feet, the worn soles of his sneakers barely offering protection against the cold concrete of the apartment building's stoop. He could smell the faint, greasy aroma of frying onions from Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment 2 floors down, a smell that usually brought a pang of hunger, but today was overshadowed by a pervasive unease. He hadn't told his mother about giving his jacket away. How could he explain such a reckless act? A small, selfish part of him wished he'd just hurried past, head down, ignoring the man's shivering pleas. A sudden, low hum vibrated through the concrete, drawing Desa's attention to the street. A sleek, black Cadillac Escalade, gleaming like a polished obsidian stone, pulled up to the curb. The vehicle was so out of place in their run-down neighborhood that Desa's heart pounded against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. He felt a prickle of fear, an instinctual recoil from the unknown. What could a car like that possibly want here? The driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out. Desa's breath caught in his throat. It was the homeless man, but different. Gone were the tattered layers, the grime, the haunted look in his eyes. He wore a tailored suit, the fabric the color of charcoal, and his face, clean-shaven, held an air of authority that Desa couldn't reconcile with the shivering figure huddled in the doorway the night before. The transformation was so complete, so jarring, that Desa wondered if the cold had finally seeped into his brain, conjuring up this impossible vision. The man's eyes, however, held the same kindness Desa remembered, a flicker of warmth in the depths of their dark pools. He walked towards Desa, his movements measured and confident, a stark contrast to the shuffling gait of the previous night. Desa felt a strange mix of awe and apprehension swirling within him. He couldn't tear his gaze away, his mind grappling with the impossibility of it all. He felt Malik nudge him, a silent question in his friend's wide eyes. Desa could only shake his head, equally bewildered. "You're the young man who gave me his jacket last night," the man said, his voice deep and resonant, devoid of the tremor Desa had heard before. The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. Desa felt a rush of heat climb up his neck, staining his cheeks. He swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. He wanted to speak, to offer some explanation, some justification for his impulsive act of charity, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. "Two," he stammered, feeling the weight of his mother's worries, the constant struggle for survival, pressing down on him. He had given away their only protection against the relentless winter, a reckless act of compassion that now seemed foolish, even dangerous. He braced himself for the inevitable reprimand, the disappointed shake of the head. Instead, the man smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes, crinkling the skin at the corners. The tension in Desa's shoulders eased slightly, replaced by a bewildering confusion. "My name is Richard Langford," the man said, extending a hand towards Desa. The name echoed in Desa's mind, a name he had heard whispered in hushed tones, associated with wealth, power, and an almost mythical aura. Richard Langford, the millionaire philanthropist whose name adorned buildings across the city, whose face graced magazine covers. Richard Langford, standing in front of his dilapidated apartment building, offering him his hand. Desa stared at the outstretched hand, the impeccably manicured nails, the expensive watch glinting in the afternoon sun. It felt like a scene from a dream, unreal, fantastical. He hesitantly reached out, his small, rough hand disappearing into Langford's larger, warmer one. The contact sent a jolt through him, a strange mix of disbelief and burgeoning hope. He glanced at Malik, whose eyes were wide with astonishment, mirroring his own bewilderment. "I don't understand," Desa finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. The words felt inadequate, insufficient to express the whirlwind of emotions raging within him. Confusion, fear, and a fragile tendril of hope intertwined, creating a knot of anxiety in his chest. Langford's smile softened. "I was testing the waters, so to speak," he said, his gaze sweeping over the worn brick of the apartment building, the overflowing trash cans, the stray cats slinking through the alley. "I wanted to see, firsthand, the heart of this community." His eyes returned to Desa, holding a depth of understanding that made Desa feel strangely seen, acknowledged in a way he had rarely experienced. "And you, young man," Langford continued, his voice laced with a quiet admiration, "you showed me more than I could have hoped for." Desa's mind raced, trying to grasp the implications of Langford's words. Testing the waters? What did that mean? He looked from Langford to Malik and back again, a silent plea for understanding in his eyes. He felt a tremor of fear, a premonition that his life, his mother's life, was about to change irrevocably. He just didn't know how. The afternoon sun, filtering through the gaps in the buildings, cast long shadows across the street, painting the scene in a surreal, almost otherworldly light. The air, thick with the unspoken, hummed with anticipation. The biting Memphis wind, a cruel hand against their faces, seemed to mock the warmth that had briefly bloomed between them. Desa clutched his thin shirt, the absence of his jacket a constant, chilling reminder of his impulsive act. He glanced up at the man, Mr. Langford, a question mark etched on his young face. Langford's expensive overcoat and polished shoes seemed to belong to a different world, a world Desa could only glimpse from the cracked pavement of his neighborhood. This close, Desa could see the fine lines etched around Langford's eyes, a roadmap of a life Desa couldn't begin to imagine. What could a man like this possibly want with me? He wondered, the thought a nervous flutter in his stomach. Tanya, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, mirrored her son's confusion. Her gaze flickered between Desa and Langford, suspicion battling with a fragile hope. She had spent her life guarding against false promises, against glimmers of light that inevitably faded into the harsh realities of their existence. This man, he's too polished, too something. A knot tightened in her chest. This felt like a dream, the kind that shattered with the first rays of dawn. Langford's breath plumed out in white puffs, momentarily obscuring his face. He hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully, each syllable weighted with an unspoken significance. I was testing people, he finally admitted, his voice low, almost swallowed by the wind. He looked away, towards the decaying brick of the apartment building, his gaze distant, as though searching for something lost in the urban landscape. Desa's brows furrowed. Testing? The word echoed in his mind, a strange dissonance against the image of the shivering man huddled in his jacket. He felt a flicker of resentment, a spark of anger at being manipulated. Like we're lab rats? But the spark died quickly, doused by a wave of confusion. Why would someone test kindness? Tanya's suspicion solidified. Testing, she echoed, the word sharp, laced with protective skepticism. Her hand instinctively went to Desa's shoulder, drawing him closer. He's playing some kind of game, a cruel game. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anxiety. Langford met her gaze, his own eyes filled with a complex mixture of emotions Desa couldn't decipher. Shame? Regret? Something deeper, darker, flickered beneath the surface. I wanted to see, he continued, his voice gaining strength. If kindness true, selfless kindness was still out there. In a world where everyone seems to look out for only themselves. He paused, his breath hitching. He seemed to be fighting an internal battle, wrestling with demons only he could see. A sudden image flashed into his mind. His younger self, huddled in a doorway, just like the man Desa had helped, cold and alone, ignored by the hurried footsteps of passers-by. The memory, sharp and painful, stabbed at him. He swallowed hard, pushing the image down, burying it beneath layers of carefully constructed composure. Desa looked from Langford to the ground and back again. The man's words resonated with him, a strange echo of his own experiences. He'd seen the indifference, the averted gazes, the hurried steps that avoided eye contact with those in need. He hadn't understood it then, and he didn't understand it now. Why not help? It's just a little thing. Tanya remained silent, her eyes narrowed, her skepticism a tangible shield around them. She waited, her body tense, ready to deflect whatever blow was coming. He's going to ask for something. There's always a price. The thought was a bitter taste in her mouth. Langford drew a deep breath, as though steeling himself for a confession. You didn't walk past, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He looked directly at Desa, his gaze intense. You gave up the only warm thing you had. He shook his head slightly, a mixture of wonder and something akin to awe in his expression. Desa shifted uncomfortably under the weight of his gaze. It was just a jacket, he thought, but the words felt inadequate, hollow against the depth of emotion in Langford's eyes. He felt a strange sense of unease, a discomfort at being the focus of such intense scrutiny. A flicker of something that might have been hope sparked in Tanya's chest, fragile and hesitant. Could it be? No, it's too good to be true. She held her breath, afraid to even whisper the possibility. Desa, Langford said, his voice now firm, resolute. I want to offer you a full scholarship to Langford Academy. The words hung in the air, heavy with implications, pregnant with the potential to reshape Desa's future. Desa stared at him, his mind struggling to grasp the enormity of the offer. Langford Academy? The Langford Academy? The prestigious private school, a world away from his current reality, a place he had only ever seen from the outside, its gates a symbol of unattainable privilege. Tanya gasped, the air rushing from her lungs. The fragile hope blossomed into a vibrant flower, filling her chest with a warmth that had nothing to do with the missing jacket. A scholarship? To Langford Academy? The words echoed in her mind, a dizzying refrain. She looked at Desa, her eyes shining with unshed tears. This could change everything. And as if that wasn't enough, Langford continued, his gaze shifting to Tanya, his voice softer, but no less impactful. And Mrs. Briggs, I want to offer you a management position at Langford Industries. A position with a salary that will provide for you and Desa. The world tilted on its axis. Tanya swayed, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. The dam of her carefully controlled emotions finally broke, tears streaming down her face. A job? A real job? With a good salary? The weight of years of struggle, of constant worry, began to lift, replaced by a dizzying sense of possibility. Desa looked at his mother, then back at Langford. The biting wind seemed to fade, replaced by a burgeoning warmth that spread through him, a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with hope. He didn't fully understand the implications of the offer, not really, but he understood one thing. His life, their lives were about to change. And in that moment, standing on the cracked pavement outside their small apartment, the future stretched before him. No longer a bleak and uncertain path, but a road paved with possibilities, shimmering with the promise of a new beginning. The weak Memphis sun, filtering through a grime-streaked window pane, painted a dusty rectangle on Desa's bedroom floor. Dust motes danced in the pale light, a silent ballet against the backdrop of peeling floral wallpaper. Desa sat on the edge of his bed, the mattress springs groaning softly beneath him, a crisp plastic bag resting beside him. He ran a hand over the smooth surface, the crinkling sound strangely loud in the quiet room. Inside, folded neatly, lay the uniform of Langford Academy. A strange, unfamiliar weight settled in his stomach, a mix of anticipation and a faint, nagging unease. Langford Academy. The words themselves sounded alien, a world away from the cracked concrete and chain-link fences of his neighborhood. Just a few days ago, such a future had been as distant as the stars, a shimmering impossibility beyond his reach. He picked at a loose thread on his worn jeans, his mind replaying the events of the past few days like a flickering film reel. The biting wind, the man huddled in the doorway, the unexpected warmth of Mr. Langford's gaze. He still couldn't quite grasp the enormity of it all. It felt surreal, like a dream he might wake from at any moment. He glanced at the small, framed photo on his nightstand, a faded picture of him and his mother, her smile bright despite the weariness etched around her eyes. He knew this was for her, more than for himself. This was a chance for a better life, a life free from the constant worry that shadowed her every expression. The door creaked open, and his mother, Tanya, stepped into the room, her face illuminated by a hesitant smile. "You haven't tried it on yet?" she asked, her voice soft, a hint of nervousness clinging to the edges of her words. Desa shook his head, still lost in thought. He felt a sudden, inexplicable reluctance to put on the uniform, as if by doing so, he was crossing an invisible line, leaving a part of himself behind. Tanya sat beside him on the bed, the familiar dip in the mattress bringing a strange comfort. She reached out and gently touched the plastic bag. "This is Desa," she whispered, her eyes shining with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "This is our chance." He looked at her, the lines of worry around her eyes seeming less pronounced, replaced by a fragile optimism. He knew how hard she had worked, the endless hours she'd put in at the diner, the sacrifices she'd made, all for him. He swallowed the lump in his throat, the weight in his stomach shifting, the unease slowly dissolving into a quiet determination. He finally opened the bag, the crisp, new fabric of the blazer cool against his fingertips. The deep navy blue seemed to absorb the meager light of the room. He slipped it on, the unfamiliar weight settling on his shoulders, feeling both strange and exhilarating. He caught his reflection in the small, cracked mirror hanging on the wall. The boy staring back at him looked different. Not just the uniform, but something else, something in his eyes. A spark, perhaps, a flicker of hope that mirrored the one he saw in his mother's gaze. "It fits," Tanya said, her voice thick with emotion. She reached out and adjusted the collar, her fingers lingering for a moment on his shoulder. "You look handsome." Desa managed a small smile, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. He felt a surge of warmth spread through him, a warmth that had nothing to do with the thin winter sunlight. This was the warmth of hope, of possibility, of a future he hadn't dared to dream of. Suddenly, a loud banging on the door startled them both. Desa's best friend, Malik, burst into the room, his eyes wide with excitement. Bro, I saw you through the window. You look like $1,000,000, he exclaimed, taking in Dessa's new uniform. He let out a low whistle. Bro, you're about to be rich. Desa felt a strange mixture of pride and discomfort. He didn't want to be rich. He just wanted different, better. He wanted his mother to stop worrying. No, man, he replied, shaking his head. Just blessed. Malik grinned, his eyes gleaming with a mischievous glint. Blessed and dressed, my friend. Blessed and dressed. He punched Desa lightly on the shoulder. Imagine you, Desa Briggs, attending Langford Academy. That's like next-level stuff. Desa felt a blush creep up his cheeks. He still couldn't quite wrap his head around it. He glanced at his mother, her smile a silent testament to the reality of their changed circumstances. She looked at him, her eyes filled with an unspoken pride, a depth of emotion that transcended mere words. He knew this was just the beginning, the first step on a long, unknown path. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of anticipation, a flicker of excitement for what lay ahead. The weight of the uniform on his shoulders no longer felt strange, but empowering. It was a symbol of change, of hope, of a future he was determined to embrace. The peeling wallpaper, the dusty floor, the cramped room, they were still there, tangible reminders of his past. But they no longer defined him. He was Desa Briggs, a student of Langford Academy, and he knew, deep in his heart, that this was only the beginning of his story. The world outside his window, a world he had only glimpsed from afar, was finally within his reach. And he was ready. The biting wind, a familiar adversary, whipped around Desa's ankles, tugging at the hem of his new, warm coat. A week had passed since that cold, life-altering night, yet standing on the same corner, the chill felt different. It wasn't a personal assault anymore. It was a reminder of the man huddled in the doorway, his eyes glazed with a desperate kind of surrender. A reminder of the weight of his own old jacket, leaving his arms, the strange lightness that followed, and the even stranger warmth that bloomed in its place. He rubbed his gloved hands together, the soft wool a stark contrast to the rough fabric he was used to. He still felt a phantom itch on his palms, where the worn patches of his old coat used to rub. He shifted from foot to foot, the new boots sturdy and unfamiliar. He saw Malik approaching from the other side of the street, his breath puffing out in white clouds. Malik grinned, his eyes crinkling at the corners. You actually came back here, man? Thought you'd be too busy hanging with millionaires now. Desa chuckled, a sound that still felt foreign coming from his chest, so unused to genuine lightheartedness. Nah, he said, shoving his hands deeper into his pockets. He hadn't told Malik everything. Not about the deal, the scholarship, the new life that was unfolding before him like a freshly paved road. He'd felt a strange need to keep it close, to protect its fragile newness. Just wanted to see this place again. He wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was a pilgrimage of sorts, an acknowledgement of where he'd come from, a grounding point in a whirlwind of change. Malik's smile faded slightly, replaced by a thoughtful frown. It's weird, right? Seeing him gone. Desa nodded, his gaze drifting to the empty doorway. The absence felt heavy, a void carved into the familiar cityscape. He thought about how easily he could have walked past that night, just like so many others had. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, colder than the wind. He wasn't special. He was just lucky. Lucky enough to have learned a lesson that night. A lesson most people never truly understood. A lesson about seeing, really seeing, the humanity in others, even especially when shrouded in misfortune. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, its tinted windows obscuring the occupant. Desa's heart quickened. He recognized the car. Mr. Langford. He straightened up, a nervous flutter in his stomach. He'd been meeting with Mr. Langford almost every day since that night, discussing the scholarship, the logistics of moving, the endless possibilities that stretched before him. But every encounter still felt surreal, like a dream he might wake up from at any moment. The back door opened, and Mr. Langford stepped out, the crisp winter air ruffling his silver hair. He looked different here, on Desa's turf, out of his element. Yet, there was a certain ease in his posture, a softening of the sharp lines that usually defined him. He offered Desa a small, almost hesitant smile. "Desa, Malik, Mr. Langford," Desa replied, his voice a little shaky. He glanced at Malik, who was staring at Mr. Langford with wide, disbelieving eyes. "I've been thinking," Desa began, the words tumbling out before he could second-guess himself. He gestured vaguely at the empty doorway, then to the bustling street, the faces of strangers blurring past. "There were a lot of people who walked past you that night, Mr. Langford, but I bet some of them wanted to help. They just didn't know how." The words hung in the air, fragile yet charged with a conviction that surprised even him. Mr. Langford's eyes, usually guarded and distant, seemed to pierce through him, searching. He remained silent for a long moment, the only sound the wind whistling through the buildings. Desa's stomach tightened. He'd overstepped, hadn't he? He'd presumed too much, spoken out of turn. A familiar wave of self-doubt threatened to engulf him. Then, Mr. Langford's lips curved into a slow, genuine smile. A smile that reached his eyes, crinkling the skin at the corners. "You know, Desa," he said, his voice low and resonant, "you might be right." He looked around the street, his gaze lingering on the faces of the passers-by, each one a story untold. There's a lot of untapped compassion in this world. Sometimes it just needs a catalyst. Desa's breath hitched. He hadn't expected this. He'd expected dismissal, a polite brush-off. Not this. This quiet understanding, this shared vision. He felt a surge of something akin to hope, a fragile bud pushing through the hard, frozen ground of his reality. "All right, kid," Mr. Langford said, turning back to Desa, his eyes gleaming with a newfound intensity. "Let's build something." The words, simple yet profound, echoed in the cold air. Build something, not just a scholarship, not just a new life for him and his mother. Something bigger, something that resonated with the quiet desperation he'd seen in the eyes of the homeless man, in the weary faces of his neighbors, in the silent struggles of so many unseen souls. He looked at Mr. Langford, really looked at him, and saw not just a wealthy benefactor, but a partner, a collaborator in a shared mission. A mission to ignite this spark of compassion that lay dormant within so many hearts. A mission to build a bridge between those who had and those who needed, to transform fleeting acts of kindness into lasting, meaningful change. The wind still whipped around them, but now it felt different. It wasn't a biting chill anymore. It was a breeze, carrying the seeds of hope, scattering them far and wide. And Desa knew, with a certainty that settled deep within his bones, that this was just the beginning. Perhaps, just perhaps, one small act of kindness could change the world. One person at a time.